The sound of splintering wood echoed through the quiet hallway at 2:47 a.m. Four police officers stood frozen in the doorway, flashlights trained on a woman in pajamas, hands raised. And then one of them saw it, hanging on the wall behind her, illuminated by their tactical lights, an FBI jacket with a name embroidered across the chest. The same name on the ID she'd been trying to show them. The silence that followed would end careers. But to understand how we got to this moment, this catastrophic mistake that would expose a department's darkest patterns, we need to go back 3 weeks. Back to when Special Agent Maya Richardson was just another face in a neighborhood where she wasn't supposed to belong. Maya Richardson woke every morning at 5:30 a.m., even on her rare days off. 34 years old, 12 years with the Bureau, and still her mother's voice echoed in her head. Early bird gets the worm. Baby girl. Her apartment in the Riverside district was modest, a one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better days. But it was hers. She'd saved for 3 years to afford the down payment, working overtime on weekends, skipping vacations. The neighborhood was transitioning, they said, young professionals moving in. Coffee shops replacing corner stores. Maya had watched it happen with mixed feelings. She was meticulous about her space. Everything had its place. Her running shoes lined up by the door. She did 5 miles every morning before work. Her FBI credentials on the entry table, right next to her service weapon lockbox. Her academy graduation photo on the bookshelf, flanked by pictures of her nephew's little league games. And on the wall by her desk, her issued FBI windbreaker hanging on a hook, the golden letters gleaming even in dim light. Maya's days were structured, predictable. Coffee black, no sugar. Oatmeal with blueberries. The morning news on low volume while she reviewed case files. She worked in the cyber crimes division, tracking financial fraud networks that targeted elderly victims. It wasn't the glamorous field work people imagined when they thought of federal agents, but it mattered. Every case she closed meant someone's grandmother didn't lose their life savings to a scammer in another country. Her neighbors barely knew her. She was polite, held doors, smiled in the elevator, accepted packages for Mrs. Chen next door, but she kept to herself. In her line of work, privacy wasn't just preference, it was protocol. She'd been taught early, don't advertise what you do. Don't make yourself a target, but there was something else, something she never said out loud. When you're a black woman in a badge, you learn to navigate 2 worlds. At work, she was Special Agent Richardson, sharp, thorough, unshakable. In her neighborhood, she was just Maya. She wore jeans and hoodies on weekends. She grocery shopped at the same store her mother used to take her to as a kid, 20 minutes away, because she liked the reminder of home. She'd worked too hard to get where she was, first in her family to graduate college. Fought through the academy when instructors doubted a woman her size could handle the physical requirements. Proved herself in a field office where she was often the only black woman in the room. She'd learned to keep her head down, do the work, let results speak louder than words. Every evening, Maya had a routine. She'd come home around 7 p.m., change into comfortable clothes, make dinner, usually something simple, pasta or stir-fry, and spend an hour on her laptop finishing reports. Then she'd call her mother in Atlanta. They'd talk about everything except work. Her mother still worried even after all these years. "You taking care of yourself?" her mother would ask. "Always, Mama. You eating real food, not just those frozen meals. Real food, I promise, and you're being careful." "I don't like you in that neighborhood alone." Maya would smile, looking around her apartment. "Mama, this is one of the safest neighborhoods in the city." "You worry too much." If only she had known how wrong she was. Riverside had changed dramatically in 5 years. What was once a predominantly black and Latino working-class neighborhood had become prime real estate. Young tech workers, graduate students, and young families priced out of downtown were flooding in. Property values doubled, then tripled. The change brought tension. Longtime residents watched their favorite restaurants close, replaced by organic juice bars and artisanal coffee shops, where a latte cost more than a full meal used to. Landlords found creative ways to push out rent-controlled tenants. The neighborhood Facebook group devolved into arguments about safety and property values, words that everyone knew meant something else. Some of the newer residents had started a neighborhood watch program. They posted in the group constantly, Suspicious person walking on Oak Street. Unknown car parked overnight on Maple. The descriptions were always vague, but the subtext was clear. Maya had noticed the posts, had seen the surveillance cameras appearing on porches, had felt the eyes following her when she jogged through the neighborhood in the early mornings, her dark skin glistening with sweat, her natural hair pulled back in a ponytail. She'd mentioned it once to her colleague, Agent Torres. "They think I'm casing houses," she'd said, half joking. "I'm literally just trying to stay in shape." Torres had laughed uncomfortably. "Maybe wear your FBI shirt when you run." But Maya had refused. Why should she have to prove she belonged in her own neighborhood? The building's superintendent, Mr. Peterson, was one of the old-timers. 67 years old, originally from the neighborhood, he'd watched it transform. He liked Maya. She always paid rent on time, never complained, helped him carry groceries once when his back was acting up. "You're one of the good ones," he'd told her once, and she'd bitten her tongue. She knew he meant well, but she also knew what those words meant, the assumptions baked into them. Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, was kind but kept to herself. The young couple across the hall, Brandon and Ashley, mid-20s, worked in tech, had moved in 6 months ago. They were polite but distant. Maya had caught them watching her sometimes, whispering. She told herself she was being paranoid. She wasn't. It started 3 weeks before everything fell apart. Maya came home from work on a Tuesday evening, exhausted from a day of testimony in federal court. She'd spent 6 hours on the stand, being grilled by defense attorneys trying to poke holes in her financial analysis. She'd held her ground, stayed professional, but it had drained her. As she walked down the hallway toward her apartment, she noticed Brandon standing in his doorway, phone in hand, watching her. "Evening," she said pleasantly. He nodded but didn't smile. Didn't put the phone down. She unlocked her door and went inside, feeling his eyes on her back until she closed the door. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from the neighborhood watch coordinator, someone named Jennifer Mathers, who lived in the building next door. "Dear Riverside resident," it began. "We've noticed an increase in unfamiliar individuals in our neighborhood during unusual hours. For everyone's safety, please report any suspicious activity to our watch group or contact the police directly. Remember, if you see something, say something." Maya crumpled the note and tossed it in recycling, but the encounters continued. That weekend, she was coming back from her morning run when a police cruiser slowed beside her. The officer, white, mid-30s, sunglasses hiding his eyes, rolled down his window. "Morning," he said. "You live around here?" Maya stopped, breathing hard from her run. "Yes, officer, is there a problem?" "Just checking." "We've had some reports of suspicious activity." She bit back her first response. Stayed calm, professional. "I live in the building right there. Number 447, apartment 4B. Can I see some ID?" She was wearing running tights and a sports bra. "I'm on a jog. I don't carry my wallet when I run." The officer studied her for a long moment. Maya felt sweat cooling on her skin, felt her heart rate rising for reasons that had nothing to do with exercise. "What's your name?" "Maya Richardson." He wrote it down. Actually wrote it down like she was a suspect. "All right, you have a good day, Ms. Richardson." The way he said her name made it sound like a question, like he doubted it was real. He drove away slowly, watching her in his rear-view mirror. Maya stood there, hands on her hips, breathing deeply. She thought about all the things she could have said. About her badge locked in her apartment. About the 12 years she'd spent in federal law enforcement. About her clearance level and her case load and her exemplary record. But she'd learned long ago, engaging wouldn't help. It would only make things worse. She walked back to her building, feeling something shift inside her. A familiar wariness settling into her bones. The same wariness her mother had warned her about. The same wariness every black parent teaches their children. Be careful, be polite. Don't give them a reason, even when you've done nothing wrong. Little did she know that police officer had entered her name into a database, had flagged her address, had started a file that would grow over the next 3 weeks. And little did anyone know that every interaction was building toward a catastrophic confrontation that would expose not just individual prejudice, but systemic failure. The incidents escalated. 2 days after the jogger stop, Maya was leaving for work at 6:30 a.m. when she encountered Jennifer Mathers in the lobby. Mid-40s, blonde, dressed in expensive athleisure wear, Jennifer was the self-appointed guardian of Riverside's safety. "Oh, you must be Maya," Jennifer said, blocking the entrance. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Jennifer, Neighborhood Watch Coordinator. I don't think we've officially met." Maya shifted her work bag on her shoulder. "Nice to meet you." "I'm running late. This will just take a second." Jennifer's tone sharpened. "We've noticed you keep irregular hours, coming and going at odd times, some residents have expressed." "Concerns?" Maya felt heat rising in her chest. "Concerns about what exactly?" "Well, you know how it is. We just want to make sure everyone in the building is who they say they are." "Do you work nearby?" The question hung in the air. Maya could read the subtext. What job could you possibly have that would justify living in this increasingly expensive neighborhood? "I work for the federal government," Maya said carefully. "Oh, doing what?" Maya smiled tightly. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details." "Now, if you'll excuse me," she moved past Jennifer, feeling the woman's eyes boring into her back. That evening, she found another note. This one was more direct. "Please be aware that loitering in common areas and unfamiliar visitors may be reported to authorities for everyone's safety." Maya had never loitered anywhere. Had never had visitors except her mother once, 6 months ago. She wanted to scream, wanted to knock on every door in the building and show them her credentials, but her training kicked in. Never reveal operational details. Never compromise your position. Stay professional, so she stayed silent. The following week, it got worse. Maya was working late on a high-priority case, a ransomware ring that had hit 3 major hospitals. She didn't get home until midnight, parked in her assigned spot in the building's garage, and rode the elevator up to her floor. As she walked down the hallway, 3 doors opened. Neighbors peering out, watching her. One of them, Brandon from across the hall, held his phone up, clearly recording. Maya stopped, exhausted and fed up. "Can I help you? Just making sure everything's okay," Brandon said. "Late night. I was working." "Right." His tone suggested he didn't believe her. The phone stayed raised. Maya unlocked her door and went inside, her hands shaking with anger. The next morning, there was a new post in the neighborhood group. She wasn't supposed to see it. She wasn't a member, but a colleague who lived nearby had shown her, concerned. "Suspicious individual in building at 447 Riverside. Regular late-night comings and goings. Multiple residents concerned have contacted police to increase patrols." The post had 37 likes, 17 comments, all agreeing. All concerned? None of them had ever bothered to introduce themselves to her. Maya sat in her apartment, staring at the post on her colleague's phone. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Thought about the statistics she knew too well. The disproportionate stops, the assumptions, the split-second decisions that ended in tragedy. She thought about calling her supervisor, about filing a complaint, about moving even though she just started building equity, but something in her rebelled. She'd done everything right. Played by every rule. Earned her place through merit and hard work. Why should she have to leave? She decided to wait it out. Surely people would lose interest. Surely common sense would prevail. She had no idea how wrong she was. The police patrols increased. Maya noticed the same cruiser circling her block multiple times each evening. Different officers, but always the same slow roll past her building. Always watching. One evening, she was sitting in her car after getting home, finishing a phone call with her mother when a patrol car pulled up behind her. 2 officers got out. She ended the call quickly. Rolled down her window. "Evening," the first officer said. He was older, gray at the temples, with the weathered look of someone who'd been on the force for decades. His nameplate read, Sergeant Dawson. "We've had reports of someone matching your description casing vehicles in this garage." Maya's stomach dropped. "Casing vehicles? I live here. This is my assigned parking spot. Can I see some identification?" She reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat, hyper-aware of every movement. Her FBI credentials were inside, but something made her hesitate. Some instinct told her that revealing her position might make things worse, not better. She handed over her driver's license. Dawson studied it, then looked at her car registration on the dashboard. Everything matched. Everything was legitimate. "You work around here?" he asked. "Downtown," she said, not a lie. The field office was downtown. "What do you do?" "I'm an analyst." Also not a lie, she analyzed financial data. "For who?" Maya felt the trap closing. every question designed to make her prove she belonged, every answer scrutinized for inconsistencies. "I'd rather not say, it's confidential work." Dawson's expression hardened. "Confidential?" "Yes, sir." The second officer, younger, nervous energy circled her car, looking in the windows with his flashlight. "Find anything?" Dawson called. "No, sir." Dawson handed back her license. "All right, Ms. Richardson, but we'll be keeping an eye out. Lot of valuable property in this neighborhood." "Can't be too careful." The implication was clear. "You don't belong here. We're watching you." They left, and Maya sat in her car for 20 minutes trying to stop her hands from shaking. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the black people who'd been in their own spaces, their cars, their homes, their neighborhoods, and still ended up dead because someone decided they looked suspicious. Botham Jean, eating ice cream in his own apartment. Breonna Taylor asleep in her own bed. Adediana Jefferson playing video games with her nephew. The names scrolled through her mind like a tragic litany. She was a federal agent. She had training and resources and institutional backing. But in this moment, in her own neighborhood, she was just another black woman who made people uncomfortable. What Maya didn't know was that Sergeant Dawson had returned to the station and added more notes to her file. Evasive when questioned, refused to provide employment details, possible criminal activity. Recommend continued surveillance. What Maya didn't know was that Jennifer Mathers had compiled a dossier of her comings and goings, had taken photos, had shared them with the police, describing her as a person of interest. What Maya didn't know was that the young couple across the hall, Brandon and Ashley, had become convinced she was running some kind of illegal operation from her apartment. They'd reported hearing unusual sounds at odd hours. The sounds were Maya typing on her laptop, working late on case files. What Maya didn't know was that the system was building a narrative about her. A narrative that had nothing to do with who she actually was and everything to do with who they assumed she must be. And what no one knew was that this narrative was about to collide with reality in the most devastating way possible. 3 days before everything fell apart, Maya's supervisor called her into his office. "Richardson, I'm putting you on point for the Hernandez case," Special Agent in Charge Marcus Webb said. "We've got approval for the raid. You'll coordinate with local PD, but it's our operation." The Hernandez case was big, a fraud network that had stolen $40 million from victims across 3 states. They'd finally tracked the ringleader to a warehouse in the industrial district. The takedown was scheduled for Friday night. Maya spent the next 3 days preparing, briefing documents, coordination meetings, going over tactical plans with the SWAT team. She barely slept, running on coffee and adrenaline. Meanwhile, in her neighborhood, the surveillance intensified. Brandon had set up a camera in the hallway, pointed at her door. Ashley had joined Jennifer's neighborhood watch group and was posting regular updates about Maya's suspicious behavior. Subject left apartment at 5:45 a.m., returned at 11:30 p.m. No visible job uniform or professional attire, possible drug dealer or prostitute. The speculation was ugly, racist, and completely wrong. But it spread through the neighborhood Facebook group like wildfire. Someone tagged the police department's community liaison. A detective named Morrison reached out to Sergeant Dawson. "Hey, you know about this Richardson woman on Riverside? Multiple complaints, might want to check her out." Dawson remembered. "Yeah, I've stopped her twice. Something's off about her. Won't say where she works. Always evasive. Think there's enough for a warrant? Let me see what I can put together." Thursday evening, Maya came home at 9 p.m., grabbed a quick dinner, and settled in to review the Hernandez operation plan one more time. The raid was set for tomorrow night at 10 p.m. She needed to be sharp. She didn't hear the surveillance van that parked across the street. She didn't see the plainclothes officers who photographed her through her window. She didn't know that Dawson had convinced a judge to issue a search warrant based on credible reports of suspicious activity, evasive behavior, and potential drug trafficking operation. The warrant was thin. Any competent attorney would have gotten it thrown out. But it was late Thursday evening, the judge was tired, and Dawson had a reputation as a solid cop. The warrant was approved for execution Friday night, anytime after 8 p.m. Friday morning, Maya woke at 5:30 as always. She went for her run, came back, showered, dressed in her work clothes, dark pants, button-down shirt, her FBI credentials in her bag. She had a full day ahead, final briefings, equipment check, tactical review. As she left her apartment, she passed Jennifer in the hallway. "Big plans today?" Jennifer asked, fake sweetness dripping from every word. Maya didn't trust herself to respond, just nodded and kept walking. "We'll be watching," Jennifer called after her. Maya felt a chill run down her spine but dismissed it. She had bigger things to worry about. The Hernandez raid went perfectly. They hit the warehouse at exactly 10 p.m., caught the suspects by surprise, seized evidence, made arrests. By 11:30 p.m., Maya was at the field office, processing evidence and filing preliminary reports. Her phone had died around 9 p.m. She'd forgotten to charge it in the rush of the operation. She was too focused on the case to notice. At midnight, exhausted but satisfied, she finally packed up to go home. Sack Webb stopped her at the door. "Great work tonight, Richardson. Take tomorrow off. You earned it," she smiled. "Thanks, sir. I'll finish these reports first thing Monday." She drove home through empty streets, running on fumes. Her body ached. Her mind was fuzzy with exhaustion. All she wanted was her bed. She parked in the garage at 12:47 a.m., rode the elevator up, walked down the quiet hallway to her apartment. She didn't notice the unusual silence. Didn't see that all the neighboring doors were closed, lights off. Didn't realize that Sergeant Dawson had assembled a team. That they'd been watching her building since 8 p.m., waiting for her to return. That they'd grown impatient around 11 p.m. and decided to proceed without her present. Didn't know that they'd tried to call her, that her dead phone had sent them straight to voicemail. That they'd interpreted this as suspect avoiding contact. Didn't know that they'd been waiting in the stairwell for almost 2 hours. Growing more certain with every passing minute that they were about to bust a major criminal operation. Maya unlocked her door, stepped inside, turned on the light, and that's when her life changed forever. The door was closed for less than 30 seconds before the pounding started. "Police." "Search warrant, open the door." Maya's training kicked in immediately. Her hand went to her hip, but she wasn't wearing her service weapon. It was in the lockbox by the door, as always when she came home. "Open the door now." She moved toward the door, heart racing. "Hold on." "I'm coming. You have 10 seconds. Maya reached for the deadbolt, but before she could unlock it, she heard a different sound, the battering ram. The door exploded inward, wood splintering, the frame cracking. 4 officers stormed in, weapons drawn, flashlights blinding her. "Get down! Get on the ground!" Maya's hands shot up instinctively. "I'm down now." She dropped to her knees, then to her stomach, hands spread wide. She knew the drill. She'd been on the other side of raids before, but this was different. This was her home. These were local cops, not federal agents. "Maya Richardson?" Dawson's voice breathing hard from the adrenaline. "Yes," she said, face pressed to the floor. "I'm Special Agent Maya Richardson, FBI. My credentials are—" "Sure you are," one of the other officers laughed. "And I'm the president." "I'm serious. My credentials are on the entry table, right there." "Look," Dawson nodded to the younger officer, the same one from the garage stop. The kid picked up the leather credential case, opened it. His face went white. "Sarge, what?" She's FBI." Dawson crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed the credentials, stared at the photo, the badge, the Department of Justice seal. "Special Agent Maya Richardson, Cyber Crimes Division. Security clearance, top secret." "That doesn't mean anything," Dawson said, but his voice had changed. "Could be fake. We need to verify." "There's a number," the young officer said. "Right there. FBI verification hotline." Dawson pulled out his phone, started to dial, then stopped. His eyes had landed on something else. Hanging on the wall, directly in front of him, illuminated by their tactical lights, Maya's FBI windbreaker. The one she'd been issued at Quantico, the one with her name embroidered across the chest. The same name on the credentials in his hand. And next to it, her academy graduation photo, her certificate of completion, a commendation letter from the director. The room went silent. The other officers had spread out through her apartment. They were seeing it too. The case files on her desk, marked confidential FBI use only. The locked gun safe with federal markings. The framed photo of her shaking hands with the sack at her promotion ceremony. One officer emerged from the bedroom. "Sarge, you need to see this." Her closet was open. 3 FBI raid jackets hanging neatly. Her ballistic vest with FBI in yellow letters. Her backup service weapon properly secured in its case. Dawson stood frozen, the credentials still in his hand. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "What? Out now, back to the hallway." The officers filed out, confused. Dawson looked down at Maya, still on the ground, hands spread. "You can. You can get up." Maya rose slowly, deliberately. Her knees ached from the impact. Her hands were shaking, not with fear now, but with rage. "Would you like to call that verification number?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. Dawson's face had gone gray. "That won't be necessary." "I think it is. I think you should call it right now. And explain to whoever answers why you just executed a search warrant on a federal agent's home without doing basic due diligence." "Look, we had credible reports." "Credible reports of what?" Maya's voice rose. "Of a black woman living in a neighborhood where apparently I'm not supposed to exist. Of someone coming and going from their own home at hours that someone else decided were suspicious. We didn't know, you didn't check." She pointed at the credentials in his hand. "You ran my name, I know you did. I saw you write it down 3 weeks ago when you stopped me jogging. My name is in your system. One search, one basic background check would have shown you exactly who I am." Dawson had no answer. The young officer spoke up from the hallway. "We were told there was possible drug activity. Based on what evidence?" Maya demanded. "Let me see the warrant." Dawson handed it over with shaking hands. Maya read it quickly, her anger growing with every word. "Evasive behavior when questioned. I told you I worked in a confidential capacity. Unusual hours. I work federal cases. Suspicious individuals coming and going. I've had one visitor in 6 months, my mother." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "You know what this is. This is racial profiling dressed up as a search warrant. This is you seeing a black woman in a nice neighborhood and deciding I must be a criminal. That's not—" "Don't." Her voice cut like a knife. "Don't insult me by lying right now." What happened in the next 10 minutes would determine not just the fate of these officers, but expose a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Because Maya did something that changed everything. She pulled out her phone, now charging, turned back on, and started making calls. First, to her supervisor. Sack Webb answered on the second ring, alert despite the 2 a.m. hour. "Richardson, what's wrong?" "Sir, I need you to document this call. Local police just executed a warrant on my home. I need official notification filed." She heard Webb's sharp intake of breath. "Are you hurt?" "No, sir. But they destroyed my door, and I'm standing in my living room with 4 officers who just realized they raided a federal agent." "Stay on the line." The second call was to her office's legal counsel. The third was to the FBI's inspection division, the internal affairs unit that investigated misconduct. And the fourth, the one that made Dawson's blood run cold, was to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Each call was professional, factual, precise. Maya's training showed in every word. "Yes, I'd like to file a formal complaint regarding potential civil rights violations. No, I was not given opportunity to verify my identity before forced entry. Yes. I have reason to believe this was racially motivated." Dawson tried to interrupt. "Agent Richardson, maybe we can?" She held up one finger, continuing her conversation. When she finally ended the calls, she turned to him with cold fury. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my apartment. You're going to preserve every piece of documentation related to this warrant. Every report, every surveillance log, every complaint that led to this. Because tomorrow morning there are going to be very serious people asking very serious questions. Listen, this was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." Maya's laugh was bitter. "You broke down my door at 2 a.m. because neighborhood busybodies decided I looked suspicious. You didn't verify my identity. You didn't do basic background checks. You acted on racial bias and lazy police work." She walked to her wall and took down the FBI jacket, held it up. "This has been hanging here since the day I moved in. If any of you had bothered to actually investigate before assuming I was a criminal, you would have known exactly who I am." The young officer looked sick. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me." Apologize to every other black person in this neighborhood who's been stopped, questioned, and harassed because you all decided that brown skin equals probable cause. In the hallway, doors were cracking open. Neighbors peering out, seeing the officers leaving Maya's apartment, heads down, radio chatter urgent. Brandon and Ashley watched from their doorway. Jennifer Mathers stood at the end of the hall, phone in hand. She'd been the one to call Dawson when she saw Maya come home, to let him know the suspect had returned. They were all about to learn a very expensive lesson. Because Maya wasn't done, not by a long shot, morning came with a vengeance. Maya had spent the rest of the night documenting everything, photographs of her destroyed door, screenshots of every neighborhood watch post mentioning her, written timeline of every interaction with police. She worked with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly how investigations worked. At 7 a.m., her phone rang. Sack Webb. Richardson, I'm downstairs. We need to talk. He arrived with 2 other agents and a representative from the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. They examined the damage, took statements. Their faces grew darker with every detail. This isn't just about you anymore, Webb said grimly. This is about the integrity of federal law enforcement. They raided an FBI agent's home without proper vetting. That's a massive security breach. By 9 a.m., news had spread through the field office. By 10 a.m., it had reached FBI headquarters in Washington. By 11 a.m., the director's office was involved. At noon, the first news crews arrived at Maya's building, someone Maya never learned who had leaked the story. FBI agent's home raided by local police in apparent case of mistaken identity. The police department's public information officer scrambled to get ahead of the story. They released a carefully worded statement. Last night, officers executed a lawful search warrant based on community complaints. We are reviewing the circumstances and will provide updates as appropriate. But the story had legs. Within hours, civil rights attorneys were calling. Community organizers were mobilizing. And the neighborhood Facebook group that had been so active in documenting Maya's suspicious behavior suddenly went private. Too late. Maya had screenshots of everything, every racist assumption, every paranoid post, every concerned citizen report that amounted to nothing more than "black woman exists in my neighborhood." She turned them all over to the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Jennifer Mathers posted a frantic message before the group went private. We were just trying to keep our neighborhood safe. How were we supposed to know? The responses were swift and brutal. Maybe by introducing yourself instead of surveilling her, you could have asked her what she did for a living like a normal person. This is exactly what racial profiling looks like. Brandon and Ashley tried to delete their posts, but the internet is forever. Someone had archived everything. At 2 p.m., the police chief held a press conference. We are conducting a thorough review of last night's incident. If policies were not followed, there will be accountability. It was too little, too late, because by then someone had dug deeper into the files. A reporter from the local investigative team had filed a public records request. What they found was stunning. Over the past 18 months, the Riverside neighborhood, which had gone from 60% minority to 35% minority as gentrification accelerated, had seen a 300% increase in police calls for suspicious activity. 85% of those calls involved people of color. In that same period, actual crime had decreased by 40%. The reporter cross-referenced the calls with arrests. Out of 247 suspicious person reports, only 3 had led to actual criminal charges. All 3 were for minor infractions: expired tags, outstanding parking tickets, marijuana possession. None involved the drug trafficking or criminal enterprises that neighborhood watch groups kept reporting. The pattern was undeniable. As white residents moved in, Black and Latino residents were increasingly treated as intruders in their own neighborhoods. And Maya Richardson's case was just the most dramatic example. The story broke on the evening news with a damning headline: Local police raid federal agent's home in pattern of racial profiling. The fallout was swift and devastating. By week's end, Sergeant Dawson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The young officer who'd laughed about Maya's credentials was suspended without pay. The judge who'd signed the warrant was facing a formal complaint with the Judicial Review Board. But the real reckoning came from an unexpected direction. The Department of Justice announced a formal pattern and practice investigation into the police department. The FBI's Inspection Division launched a review of how the department had handled information about a federal agent. And the Civil Rights Division opened cases on 15 other residents who'd been similarly harassed. Maya's story had opened a floodgate. Other residents came forward. A Latino doctor who'd been stopped 6 times in 3 months. An elderly black woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, now being questioned every time she collected her mail. A graduate student who'd been reported as a prowler for studying late in the library. The neighborhood Facebook group was subpoenaed as evidence. Jennifer Mathers hired an attorney. Brandon and Ashley listed their apartment for sale. 2 weeks after the raid, Maya stood in a federal courtroom, not as a defendant, as a witness. The civil lawsuit was moving forward, not just against the police department, but against the city and against several individuals who'd filed false reports. Maya's attorneys had been thorough. But this preliminary hearing was about something bigger. The Department of Justice was seeking a consent decree, federal oversight of the police department's practices. Maya's testimony was crucial. She took the stand in a crisp FBI windbreaker, her credentials visible on her belt. The defense attorney representing the city tried to minimize what had happened. "Agent Richardson, isn't it true that you deliberately withheld information about your employment when questioned by officers?" "I informed them I worked in a confidential capacity for the federal government." "That was appropriate under FBI protocol, but you didn't specifically say you were FBI." "I shouldn't have had to. A basic background check would have revealed my identity." That's standard procedure before executing a warrant. The officers were acting on good faith community reports. The officers were acting on racial bias. Maya's voice was steady. But steel ran through every word. "Those community reports were based entirely on my race and the assumption that I couldn't legitimately afford to live in that neighborhood." She pulled out a document. "I've reviewed the warrant application. It claims I was evasive when questioned. The truth is, I answered every question lawfully while maintaining operational security. It claims unusual hours. I work federal cases. It claims suspicious individuals. I had 1 visitor in 6 months." The attorney tried again. "But surely you understand the officers were just—" "I understand perfectly," Maya interrupted. "I understand that I did everything right. I graduated top of my class. I served my country for 12 years. I paid cash for my apartment. And none of it mattered because to those officers, to those neighbors, I was guilty of being black in a gentrifying neighborhood." The courtroom was silent. "I understand," Maya continued, her voice cracking slightly for the first time, "that if I hadn't been FBI, if I had been a teacher or a nurse, or a store manager, my door would have still been broken down. I would have still been treated like a criminal, and I would have had far fewer resources to fight back." She looked directly at the defense attorney. "I understand that I'm lucky, because I have a badge and institutional backing. But what about all the people in my neighborhood who don't? What about the doctor who's been stopped 6 times? The grandmother who's lived there for 30 years? The student trying to finish his degree?" "Your Honor," the defense attorney objected. The judge held up her hand. She was an older black woman who'd been on the bench for 20 years. "Let her finish." Maya took a breath. "This case isn't about me. It's about a system that sees black and brown people as threats to be managed, rather than neighbors to be welcomed. It's about police who execute warrants without basic due diligence, because they're so certain of our guilt. It's about communities that weaponize safety to exclude anyone who doesn't look like them." She pulled out the FBI jacket that had been hanging on her wall. "This was visible from my doorway. Any officer who'd knocked on my door for a welfare check would have seen it, but they didn't knock. They didn't investigate. They didn't verify. They just assumed." The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Agent Richardson." In the gallery, reporters typed furiously. Civil rights attorneys exchanged glances. The police chief sat stone-faced. They all knew what was coming. The consent decree was approved. Federal oversight for 5 years. Mandatory bias training. New policies for warrant execution. Community oversight boards. and financial penalties that would cost the city millions. But that wasn't the end. 3 months later, the individual consequences had fully materialized. Sergeant Dawson was fired. Not for executing the warrant the union would have protected him there, but for failing to run a basic background check before raiding a federal facility, which, legally, is what an FBI agent's residence qualifies as. The oversight was too egregious to defend. The young officer was demoted and transferred. The other 2 officers received formal reprimands. Jennifer Mathers faced civil penalties for filing false police reports. Her fine, $50,000 plus court costs. Her reputation in the neighborhood, destroyed. Brandon and Ashley sold their apartment at a loss in their hurry to leave. The new owners introduced themselves to Maya with homemade cookies and genuine apologies for their predecessors. The police department instituted new policies. All warrants involving residential properties now required verification of occupant identity through multiple databases. Community complaints required corroborating evidence before triggering investigations, and every officer underwent mandatory implicit bias training. The Neighborhood Watch Group disbanded. In its place, actual community organizations emerged, ones focused on real safety through neighborhood connection rather than surveillance and suspicion. Maya's case became a training example at the FBI Academy. The Riverside incident was now taught as a cautionary tale about the importance of proper verification and the dangers of assumption. But the most significant change was less tangible. The local news ran a 6-part series on gentrification and policing. Community forums were held. Residents new and long-time began actually talking to each other. The conversations were uncomfortable, often painful, but necessary. Maya received a formal apology from the police chief. She accepted it professionally but without warmth. "Words are easy," she told him. "I'll judge you by whether anything actually changes." She also received something unexpected: dozens of letters from other residents who'd experienced similar treatment. Many of them thanked her for speaking up. Some shared stories that brought tears to her eyes. One letter came from Mrs. Chen, her quiet neighbor. "I never said anything when they stopped you," she wrote in careful handwriting. "I was afraid. I am so sorry. You were brave and you made it safer for all of us." Maya's mother came to visit that weekend. They sat in Maya's apartment, the door now repaired, stronger than before. "You could have walked away," her mother said. "Could have moved, let it go." Maya shook her head. "Then nothing would have changed." The next black family moving in would have faced the same thing. Her mother hugged her tight. "I'm proud of you, baby girl." Scared out of my mind, but so proud. The civil lawsuit settled for an undisclosed amount. Maya donated half to legal aid organizations supporting tenants fighting displacement. The other half went to a scholarship fund for students from her old neighborhood pursuing careers in law enforcement. "We need more good people in the system," she explained to reporters. "People who see neighbors, not suspects." 6 months after the raid, Maya still lived in the same apartment. She'd considered leaving, the memories were painful. But she refused to be driven out of her home. Besides, the neighborhood was different now. People introduced themselves, asked her name, welcomed her when they saw her jogging. It wasn't perfect. She still caught wary glances sometimes, still felt the weight of being watched, but it was better, and that mattered. One evening, Maya was coming home from work when she ran into the building's new superintendent. Mr. Peterson had retired, his back finally giving out. The new super was a young Latino man named Carlos. "Agent Richardson," he said warmly. "Package for you came today." "I put it inside your door." "Thank you, Carlos." "Hey, I wanted to thank you," he added. "What you did, standing up like that, it helped my family too. My sister lives 2 blocks over. She used to be scared to walk her dog at night. People called the police on her 3 times. Now, it's better." Maya smiled. "I'm glad. You did a brave thing." She thought about that word. Brave, she'd just been living her life, going to work, coming home, existing. The fact that it required bravery said everything about what was wrong, but also maybe about what could change. The story of Maya Richardson and the Riverside raid became more than just a news cycle. It became a case study, a teaching moment, a mirror held up to uncomfortable truths. It revealed how gentrification doesn't just change the economics of a neighborhood, it changes who's seen as belonging. How safety can become a code word for exclusion. How racial bias operates not through overt hatred, but through assumptions so ingrained they feel like common sense. It showed how systems fail when they prioritize speed over accuracy, suspicion over verification, assumptions over evidence. But it also showed something else. It showed that speaking up matters. That documentation matters. That refusing to accept injustice, even when it would be easier to stay silent, can create ripples that change more than just one life. Maya could have moved. Could have accepted the police department's apology and settled quietly. Could have treated it as an unfortunate misunderstanding and moved on. Instead, she forced a reckoning, not out of vengeance. Out of principle, because she knew that her badge and her resources gave her a platform that others didn't have, and she chose to use it. The Riverside neighborhood would never be the same. Some changes were uncomfortable. Longtime residents priced out, culture shifted, familiar landmarks replaced. But other changes were necessary, real conversations about race and belonging, policies reformed, assumptions challenged. Progress isn't clean. It's messy and complicated and imperfect. But it's still progress. Maya Richardson went back to work, back to tracking fraud networks and building cases, back to the quiet, methodical work that had defined her career. But she was different now, too. She'd learned that you can do everything right, follow every rule, earn every credential, play by every code, and still be seen as a threat. She'd learned that silence in the face of injustice protects systems, not people. And she'd learned that her story, painful as it was, had power. The power to change minds, to reform systems. To make it just a little bit easier for the next person who looked like her to simply exist in their own neighborhood without suspicion. Was it fair that she had to fight this battle? No. Was it right that her trauma became a teaching moment? No, but did it matter that she fought anyway? Yes. Sometimes justice isn't about perfect outcomes, it's about incremental change. About making the next generation's fight a little bit easier. About refusing to let wrong stand unchallenged. Maya hung her FBI jacket back on the wall, same place it had always been, visible. Undeniable, unapologetic. A reminder that she belonged, not because of the badge, but because it was her home. If this story moved you, if it made you think about assumptions you've made or judgments you've passed, then maybe it served its purpose. Maya Richardson's story is one story. But it echoes thousands of others. Stories of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, existing in spaces where their presence is questioned simply because of how they look. Some of those stories don't end with vindication. Some end with violence, some with quiet defeat. Some with people abandoning neighborhoods they loved because the weight of suspicion became too much to bear. But some like Maya's end with change. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. If stories like this matter to you, if they remind you that dignity and justice are worth fighting for, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. These are the stories that need to be told. The ones that make us uncomfortable, but also inspire us to do better. But Maya's story of justice is just the beginning. Because what happened when a homeless veteran walked into an elite law firm and the managing partner tried to have him removed? Well, that's a story that'll remind you that respect should never be reserved for people who look like they deserve it. Until next time.